And in accordance with PA 254 of 2020, the member should identify their physical location by stating the county, city, township, or village, and state from which he or she is attending the meeting remotely. So we're going to do roll call first.
Roll call. Mayor Garrett.
Present in Lathrup Village, Michigan, Oakland County.
Mayor Pro Tem Cantor.
Present, Lathrop Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Councilmember Ferguson.
Present, Lathrop Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Councilmember Medley.
Present, Oldfield, Suffolk County, New York.
And Councilmember Siddiqui.
Here in Lathrop Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Madam Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. First up is going to be, I hope I'm looking at the right one, but the wildlife management.
Yes, Mayor and council members, I invited Dr. David Schaefer to attend the meeting. I had a meeting with some representatives from Southfield, and they had mentioned that they have a citizens wildlife advisory, and the conversation came up about concerns residents have expressed in regards to deer and coyote. And Dr. Schaefer is here to talk about how they're approaching it and some of their research and possibly how we might be able to partner, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. And no need to call me doctor. I'm a lawyer, but not a doctor. So I appreciate it, but did not go to school that long. So no, thank you to your city administrator. And my name is David Schaefer. I'm the chairman of Southfield's relatively new Wildlife Advisory Commission. And we were formed last year with the goal of helping advise the city council in Southfield as to how best to address some of the wildlife concerns residents have raised, largely with a focus on deer and coyotes right now, as those seem to be the two that our residents are most concerned about. And I imagine that Lathrup Village has very similar concerns being in the same area. So if I may, I was planning on just sharing a brief PowerPoint presentation with a few slides on some of the information that we've gathered, walking through what we've done and what action Southfield's taken so far. And then if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field questions as well. So let's see if I can be authorized to share a screen. There we go. All right, can everyone see the screen? All right, great. So as I said, we were formed fairly recently, late in 2021, and we didn't begin meeting until January of 2020, or late in 2020, we began meeting in 2021. The goals of the commission were essentially to seek out input from residents and other stakeholders, work collaboratively with all interest groups, both in the city and without the city, and to also work with county and state agencies to essentially develop a wildlife program for the city of Southfield, which right now is still a fairly loose concept because we're trying to figure out what the residents want, what the residents need, and what the city can do. Some of the things we approached are just from a general perspective, we had about 6 months to put together an initial report. So we engaged on an information gathering campaign, looked into some signage and road hazard issues. We did do a preliminary resident survey in Southfield. It was a fairly small turnout, so I'm not going to rely too much on that, but I can let you know what we found. We looked at what some neighboring communities and other communities in the state have done, looked into educational opportunities and management techniques, and then put forward a number of short and long-term recommendations to the city council. And then recently we have recommended that Southfield join a regional effort that the Farmington Hills City Council had proposed for trying to look towards a regional and collaborative solution that involves both local governments, the county, and the state, trying to address this in less than a piecemeal approach. So just to kind of frame the issue for you, I'm sure you're all aware that the deer population in Oakland County has been growing very quickly. And part of that is due to a lack of natural predators, and another part of that is development in more traditionally rural areas, which is causing deer to move back in towards the urban areas, oftentimes following waterways like the Rouge River. Southfield and Farmington Hills have been doing an aerial count for a number of years now to try and estimate the population numbers. If you go back to 2018, Southfield had about 248 deer that were counted. In 2019, it was about 279. But then last year in 2021, it had jumped up to 869. And just for a little bit of perspective, that would be the equivalent of over 30 deer per square miles, which is well above what the natural carrying capacity for deer is, which is generally 5 to 10 per square mile, or maybe up to 20 in an urban area. And Farmington Hills found a similar growth. They're at about 730 deer counted during the same survey, which is about 22 per square mile. I don't want to put too much credence in the numbers because the accuracy of these surveys can change based on weather conditions. They normally look for footprints in snow and other signs. But I do think that a steady pattern of increased population is shown here. And I would hazard a guess that the population would be more likely an underestimate than an overestimate, but you never know with deer moving across city lines. We've talked with some research biologists in the area and with DNR. The general consensus is that deer, even in urban areas, like to follow the green areas. So your golf courses, your cemeteries, your river corridors, things like that. And then they kind of branch out from there. You generally see about 1.8 to 2 deers per doe a year reproducing. So they're double, each doe can be doubling their number each year. And in urban areas, the fawns tend to survive more often than in a more rural setting. So you don't have as much mortality, which causes the population to grow faster. And everyone in the area has seen a steady move from west to east of deer moving closer and closer to the urban environments where they used to be more in Western Oakland County and beyond. So there's a number of different options available to communities when it comes to deer if the community wants to take an active approach. One of the cornerstones is going to be public education. That's the first thing any city can do. Teach your residents and help your residents to understand what their options are, what to be concerned about, what not to be concerned about. If they're concerned about landscaping, there's things they can try and do to help minimize conflict and live in harmony with wildlife. But there is going to be conflict if population numbers keep growing. And if we get to a point where our local wildlife don't have a food source, you can try all the repellents and natural vegetation management you want. They're still going to eat everything they can if they're hungry. And we are probably getting close to that point in Southfield if the last year's survey was accurate because of the numbers that we saw. So there's a number of different options. The one that everyone is aware about is lethal population control, which generally involves using local archers or sharpshooters, either through residents in a monitored hunting program or hiring third-party contractors. Those options are the most cost-effective. They are effective at a practical level, but they also tend to be very controversial at a public level because a lot of people don't like the idea of killing deer or any animals for that matter. But a number of cities and areas have had success with these. The Kensington Metro Parks and the Oakland County Metro Parks in general have been doing some hunts for a while, and Meridian Township has also done a hunt within their borders for a number of years now, which has helped them keep their numbers under control, but it is an annual process they have to do. And for those communities that do decide to do the lethal population control, they generally do it, partner with programs like Hunters Against Hunger, which cover the processing fees for meat and ensure that any meat harvested from the animals gets processed and then donated to food shelters and food pantries around the area so that nothing goes to waste. Two other methods that have been growing in popularity, but they are also more expensive, are physical sterilization, which would be much like getting your dog or cat fixed, except it's done in the field, or chemical birth control, which is a process that's been used for a number of years with feral horses or wild horses, depending on what camp you're in out in the West. Both of these are options that are out there. There requires some additional approval at the state level and permitting, things like that. But they are available. There are some companies that do them. Others are research groups that apply for grants through states, but they also tend to be a lot more expensive. When you put it into numbers, A hunt generally costs $100 to $300 per animal, maybe a little bit more if you got to pay processing fees. Physical sterilization can be $500 or more per animal, and chemical birth control can be $1,500 or more per animal. So it ends up being a fairly large cost if you're dealing with a large population, but they're all options that are available to a city. And everything we've read has suggested that the cities that have had and townships that have had the most success have been ones that got their residents involved at an early stage. Because regardless of what the bill is, if your residents aren't happy, you're going to have problems with the program. So that's what self-built's trying to do now, is to engage with the residents and other local communities to figure out what there is an appetite for and what people can afford, and to try and make a plan for a long-term solution. And just to put in context some of the costs that are already being spent, I don't know what the village is spending on roadkill pickups, but I do know that self-built's public works department spends anywhere from $26,000 to $30,000 a year picking up and disposing of roadkill wildlife, most of which tends to be deer. And they've also started tracking the locations where wildlife is picked up so that we can try and use that to better place signs and to figure out if there's other areas to invest. So what you'll see now is just a map. And I'm happy to share this presentation with you later too, if anyone wants to click through it, but just a map of 2020 and 2021 pickup locations for deer carcasses is tracked by our Department of Public Works. If you look at the 2020, you can see that there's some clear hot spots along 10 Mile Road, as well as in areas that generally tend to follow where the Rouge River flows. And then I also pulled data from the Oakland County Road Commission, which shows a similar pattern with reported deer car accidents that tend to correlate generally with where the Rouge River flows, but also along some of the major thoroughfares. And I would hazard a guess that a lot of these report numbers with the Road Commission are underreporting, because a lot of people don't report accidents unless they sustain fairly serious damage to their vehicle. Another big concern recently that we've been made aware of is the growing coyote population in the area. And that's not unique to our community. It's something that many cities around North America have had to deal with. Toronto and Chicago actually have had a lot of issues with these over the past decade, and they've got programs in place now. The general management proposals for these is, it starts at a tiered approach, which I'll show you on the next slide. It normally starts with things like public education, feeding bans. If your community doesn't have a wildlife feeding ban already, that's normally a first step people offer. And then also providing some kind of monitoring and reporting system for residents so that they can tell their government where there's sightings at and where there's problems at. And you can use that to sort of track the animal behavior and then maybe focus efforts if you have to move into it. Once you get up to more interactions and more conflict, you start having to take action. Hazing is a reference to just basically the idea of instilling the fear of humans back into the wildlife, and could be anything from instructing people to shout loud noises, using squirt guns, hoses, chemical repellents, noisemakers, things like that, to try and remind the animals that they don't want to be near people's homes and things like that. And then if you get to a high enough level of conflict, you have to start considering removing individual problem animals. And if it continues to get bad and your population's out of control, you may move into large scale population management. And I do want to point out that a number of communities around the country have tried relocation over the years, and it's been studied by a number of wildlife biologists. And with coyotes, like with many animals, relocation tends to not be effective if it's even legal in the state, largely because the animals try and return home. They have an incredible sense of where they came from, and they will beeline back for where they were removed from. And oftentimes, if they don't make it, they'll cause problems along the way. But you can think just recently, there was a report of a black bear up in the Traverse City area that had to be put down this year by DNR, which had actually been removed and relocated by the state just last year, and had traveled quite some distance to get back into the area and was causing problems with people again. So then this next graphic is a tiered threat assessment approach that has been used for coyotes by a number of different researchers. And it's just an easy graphic way to think about the problem. if it is a problem. You know, at the low end, you have situations where you're rarely or occasionally seeing coyotes at night, which is their more natural time period to be moving around night and dusk. And at that point, you can be pretty hands off. It's normally just educating residents, telling people to get their garbage put away. Don't leave your animals out overnight. But as you start seeing animals more frequently and more into the day, you start rising on the threat level. And if you get to the point where you're starting to actually have encounters between coyotes and people's pets, or coyotes actually showing aggressive behavior towards humans, you're moving into the higher ends of the threat level. Once you get to the point where pets are starting to disappear and the animals are not showing fear of humans anymore, that's when you probably need to consider at a public safety level whether you should be removing some animals. And like I said, we also did do a brief survey with some residents in Southfield. We only received about 226 responses, so it's a very small subset of the population. But I do think that some of the concerns and numbers that were reported are probably accurate of the larger population as well. One was that most people in the city aren't feeding wildlife. That being said, there are people that are. I've been on the Nextdoor app and heard and read about many stories of this. We've actually proposed that Southfield look at its code of ordinances and adopt an ordinance that specifically and clearly makes it prohibited to feed deer and coyotes and perhaps other wildlife in people's backyards. Some of the biggest concerns that people raised were damages to landscaping, gardens, and the natural environment at city parks and recreation areas. Many people, no matter what their stance on the issue is, view the deer population in the Southfield and Oakland County area as getting out of control. A lot of our residents wanted something to be done. I think over 70% wanted the city to be more active, but they're very split on what that means. They're very split on how they want their tax money spent, and people are very split on whether they support any kind of lethal population control. And in fact, when cost wasn't factored into it in the questions, a majority of Southfield residents said they were opposed to lethal methods. With coyotes, there is a growing concern. People were more supportive of lethal population control when cost was not added as a factor there. But still, it was very divisive. I mean, you're talking about splits of 60-40 or 55-45. There are a lot of concerns from residents about fleas and ticks carrying diseases. Lyme disease is a big concern for many people. And then just general safety risks. As the animals start to be less fearful of humans, people are concerned about their kids and about their pets. And a lot of people just don't know what to do in these situations. And there was a large amount of support, almost unanimously, for increased public education, potentially doing some more signage along areas where wildlife crossings are frequent, and engaging in some habitat restoration and landscape restoration work around the city. And this next slide really just summarizes most of the points that I already laid out. So I'm not going to go back over that, but I did want to just let you know, what is Southfield doing so far? So our commission gave its first presentation to the city council in early August after having presented to a subcommittee. We haven't received any formal marching orders at this point, but there was very broad support on the council for public education efforts, increased signage, and creating an online presence linked to the Southfield City website that can serve as a repository for information for residents. We're working with the administration right now to get some of those things implemented and hope to have some of it up and running soon. There were also people raising interest about creating a centralized reporting system for residents to raise issues about wildlife sightings, coyotes, deers, and other things. We're actually looking into whether the Southfield Solutions app can be retrofitted to work for this purpose, and it's looking pretty optimistic, so I think that it can. And then, as I mentioned at our last meeting, the commission did recommend that Southfield join the regional coalition that was proposed by Farmington Hills recently to try and create a regional plan for dealing with this at a countywide level. But we also are recommending that we continue local efforts, because I think that anyone that's worked with multiple levels of government in the state can probably feel confident that any kind of regional approach is going to take some time to get off the ground. And then, of course, you got to secure funding for it as well. What we aren't doing right now is proposing any kind of population control at a hunt or a call or a birth control level. It seems like there's a lot of disagreement both among our elected officials and our residents on this. We are going to focus our efforts right now on public education and what we can do on the front end. We're going to try and bring some more speakers to the city, do some seminars, allow residents to ask questions and get the information out there for people. And then maybe in the future, we will either have, I know our mayor has proposed a non-binding vote as to what to do. I don't know what the city council is going to approve ultimately. But I do think that eventually over the next year, we'll probably see some more public outreach to try and get the residents engaged and get more guidance as to what they'd like the city to do moving forward. But that's everything I have as far as the slides go. So if there's any questions I can answer or anything you'd like to follow up on, I'm happy to do that.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions?
Do we have a lot of deer crashes? I know we've got a lot of deer. I mean, I've been hearing from residents the last couple of weeks, about lots of deer sightings, and I've seen them myself. But do we have a lot of car deer incidents in Lathrop Village? Do we know?
I don't have any actual statistics on that. I don't think there's a lot of them. We send those deer to Southfield.
Yeah, just curious.
So one of the things that I thought would be really helpful is, as we're going forward with this, is do we have a feeding ban? Because I know there are people who are feeding the deer. And so I don't know if, and that's, as you said, David, I think that that's banned. People shouldn't be feeding the deer. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's technically already banned in the Lower Peninsula per DNR regulation, but there are people that do it still.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of the concerns that I've seen is people, they're concerned when there was a deer that was limping, it obviously had been hit or something was wrong. But obviously the coyotes are following the deer where they are, and also the small animals. But I think if people are concerned about all the wildlife, that might be the place to start is to make sure that people know that we shouldn't be feeding them.
And if you are interested in that, I believe that Farmington Hills and Ann Arbor both have ordinances in place in their communities already that could probably serve as a template or a model for anything.
Yep, for sure.
David, did you say Southfield is thinking about enacting their own ordinance for not feeding, or is that underway?
We are considering it. It's at the very early stages. We're going to work with our legislative subcommittee on the city council to get some feedback there, and then probably request that the city attorney draft something for us at that point.
Well, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, Cheryl, could we put something in the e-newsletter, just reminding people not to feed deer? I know we'll probably discuss whether or not we want to have our own ordinance or not, but in the interim, that'd be great to just alert residents.
And it might be worthwhile to look at joining that regional coalition that seems to be forming as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Anything else? Well, thank you, Mr. Schaefer, for your time. And I want to say that we probably will be in touch further. So thank you again.
Thank you. And I'll be sure to pass things on to your city administrator as we move forward too in Southfield. So.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is the cannabis ordinance discussion.
Mayor and council members, if you recall, you were asking for a survey of the residents relative to the community benefits portion of the, application process. So Susie worked on drafting a survey question, which was shared with you by email just before the meeting. And I don't know if you're able to share it. Share your screen.
Yeah, let me pull this up real quick. Oh, there we hold on, let me get you all. There we go. There we go. So as Cheryl was saying, I put together this is a draft outline of what the survey will look like. And then once I get your feedback, I'll get this into a Survey Monkey, and we can get it out fairly quickly. In discussing this with Jill, we thought that really, I mean, what this comes down to is it's best to really try and link the community benefits with the capital improvements plan, since that really gives us some more legally defensible justification for having any of these requirements. Our capital improvements plan is tied to the goals of our master plan, and the goals of our master plan are linked with our zoning. And so we thought that maybe that would be a better route to gain feedback and kind of formalize it. This would also, having this tied to the capital improvements plan also allows us to further engage residents on projects that they feel maybe the city should be tackling in the next 1 to 6 years. So I've put together, like I said, this outline of a community benefits survey, describing that really what we want is resident suggestions for these capital improvement plans. I've defined what a community benefit is and what the capital improvements plan is. And then I've also provided links to the current capital improvements plan, as well as the interactive GIS dashboard. Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking today. And really kept it fairly simple with the questions to pose to residents. One, wanting to know, are you a resident? Right? I don't really want to see the deck get stacked with cannabis industry folks. I think it's important that we specifically find out whether or not they're residents, whether or not they own commercial property in the city, to see what those property owners may have to say about it, asking them for additional projects within the CIP, but more specifically, what are their top 3 priorities for community benefits? What would be their top 3 priorities overall for the whole capital improvements plan, and whether or not there was any other additional comments about long-term capital. This is supposed to say capital improvement needs in the community. So that's it in a nutshell for the survey. So I guess, 1, what do you think about the questions? And 2, what are your thoughts about tying it together with the capital improvements plan?
Don't everyone talk at once.
So I'll say something. First and foremost, I think what you've laid out here and the way you've linked it together, Susie, is really good. And just making sure that all the plans are working, side by side. The question that I would ask is, are you a registered voter in Lathrup Village? And so, because you could be a resident, but not actually be of voting age. And so then are we actually, who are we actually considering there? My other question is it worthwhile, even if you aren't a registered voter in Lathrup Village, but you own property in the city, like commercial property, would that be another group of folks that we'd be interested in hearing from separately? Are you solely looking for folks who live and own businesses with the second question?
I don't necessarily think they have to live and own a business in the city. I think it's informative to know whether or not they own commercial property. I mean, and I think that question to me is more broadly focused for the CIP as a whole, since the capital improvements plan is for the entire community, not just residents, not just the commercial district. And quite frankly, like the TDA has plenty of capital improvements projects that are solely or predominantly going to impact the commercial district. So for me, that's more informative as a whole.
So it's an or and not an and?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and so
Yeah.
maybe we just.
Or maybe an and or, right? It could be both. I don't want to be.
Okay, because I do think that that's important, because I think as we
Okay.
try to attract other businesses, it is important to know if folks are owning commercial property in the city. So I think that's, having them both is good.
Okay.
Now, they all appear to be individual questions, right?
Yeah, I had it bulleted out, and then here, I can make this, I can change. I was trying to mess with some formatting in SurveyMonkey already, so it didn't like my bullets. There we go.
I had a question about now that you got the numbers, number 4.
Okay.
So what are we getting at with that question? What are the top priorities for community benefits as opposed to the capital improvement plan? Like, don't the community benefits, like you said, relate to the CIP or impact the CIP?
Yes and no. So most of the community benefits that we have outlined right now in the application are more based on socioeconomics, right? And so the capital improvements plan, those are those big physical projects that typically require like a one-time outlay of cash, right? So think our water mains, that's a capital improvement, or paving the road. But some of the other ones that are in the application right now are, are you hiring Lathrup Village residents? That's not something that can be incorporated into the capital improvements plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But is there a way for people when they get this survey to link and see what all those different community benefits are, or do they just think of it on their own?
I could certainly include what we've already brainstormed. I can certainly include that in here. I was kind of torn as to whether or not I want to, if I give it to them, am I going to inspire creativity or inhibit it, right? Sometimes when you see those things, you don't necessarily, you're like, oh, I would have said that. Okay, I can't think of anything else. So if that's something that council would like to see, is the list of what we already have, I can put that in there.
Maybe that could just be in the invitation and the overview.
Okay.
I agree with Councilwoman Medley regarding asking the question if you're a registered voter. And I agree that we should tie it into the capital improvements plan. Everything you've laid out here is good. I really appreciate that. Just for question 5, might want to adjust the typo, but other than that, it should be good.
Okay, thank you. Question about so for the registered voter, is it more so that obviously if they're voting, they this could be something they vote on. What if they are not a registered voter, but they're over the age of 18? I mean, does that
confused off of that one and the necessity of that?
I'm sorry, Kelly, you cut out.
I was saying I was a little confused off of the saying that you had to be a registered voter also, because there are people that would be over 18 that aren't registered voters in Lathrop. Or are you just saying that people that are not registered voters in Lathrop don't get, I guess, the same amount of attention or whatever? I don't know the word I'm trying to think of right now.
Level of access.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry, I sliced my fingers open today and I'm in pain and I'm just trying to get through this.
Oh, horrible. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's my point is typically where you're registered to vote is where your heart is. And I mean, if we're including and giving an opportunity for people who own businesses, and registered voters. But yeah, I think if you're a resident, but you're not a registered voter, I don't know how much the city should really be, stepping up and asking for your opinion.
I have heart one with that, but I'll keep my opinions. But I think that one's going to be a hard. I have a hard time with that.
Were there any other questions that you thought that we might want to add? And
My other question is, you asked people if they owned commercial property. What if they own other property? Do they get a vote? Do they get to respond?
like, what other kind of property?
Well, I mean, they could own property, but maybe they don't actually live there.
Oh, like a rental?
Well, a rental, but I wouldn't know if necessarily they would consider that commercial.
Well,
Okay, so let's say,
Yeah,
for
I
example,
mean,
if I
I
had
see
a
what you're
house and my
saying.
children lived there, but I didn't rent it to them.
well, I see what you're saying. I mean, that could be as simple as saying commercial or rental property, right?
You could just say property.
Sure, yep. And then I presume you'd all like to get this out as soon as possible. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
All right.
Your next study session is next Monday. So I don't know how long you want to leave this out for feedback.
Well, I mean, it could go up and then, I mean, if it's a Survey Monkey, isn't it pretty much automated when the results come in, Susie?
Yes. I
Yeah,
believe
so we could,
yeah.
even if we left it up until, Sunday at midnight or Monday at noon, we'd have the results for the Monday study session.
And that's what I was getting at. Did you want the results for this coming Monday?
Yeah.
Well, I think soliciting, community input, we can leave it up even after that as we go forward with this, because that's not going to change, what happens or doesn't happen. We're just soliciting input for the community benefits.
So you're
So-
saying gauge as you go,
Mhm,
So you're-
yes,
right, Council Medley?
yes.
Okay.
So you're only giving the residents 1 week just to, is that what you're saying, that you're only giving them 1 week to review?
No, so we'll look at it come Monday for the study session, but just as Ian and I talked about, we can still continue to leave it up and have additional benefits as people, as they come forward to the survey. But the top 3 priorities for community benefits, capital improvements, those are just informing the decision-making process. We don't have to have the survey completed to move forward. I mean, we can solicit the input as we go.
I would say that we would want to close this before any actions taken on on adopting the application scoring criteria, so that we can incorporate those into that. So
I don't think that we have to have all of the feedback to adopt the scoring criteria. We can adopt the scoring criteria, but what you have here, you're just asking people what projects they want considered, what are the priorities, but that's not going to change the scoring criteria that we have.
Right, I agree with that.
So if you say, I want color red, white, and blue, the scoring criteria is going to say, we considered the colors. We don't have to specifically name the projects.
Correct.
I agree with that.
So we can leave it open-ended for some period of time, and I think what staff can do is provide you with report updates on those survey results in time for your next 2 study sessions. on the 4th and the 18th October. So
Yeah,
you'll
that's
listen.
good. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's the standard duration for us to leave a Survey Monkey up? Like, for example, the last Survey Monkey we conducted, what's the standard protocol to leaving it up?
I don't recall the exact amount, but typically it's a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks.
I think
Okay.
for the, when we did, no, it wasn't a Survey Monkey, but when we solicited public feedback for the comprehensive master plan, we left that online platform open for about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I've found that as we've done things, you know, for planning commission, or through, you know, for public feedback through that, or even through the DDA, like much beyond 2 weeks, you're not going to get anything. People just
True.
kind of forget about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Any other questions? Concerns?
Susie, we didn't go back and the whether or not you're a resident or a registered voter. Can you tell me what your strategy or what your thought was as far as whether it should be resident or a registered voter?
I think if we're going to ask the question about registered voter, it should be registered voter or over the age of 18. You know, I mean, there's a variety of reasons why an individual may not be registered in the city of Lathrop Village yet, right? Perhaps they are, you know, perhaps they've just moved, they haven't done it. Perhaps they're, you know, fresh out of, you know, freshly 18 and they're like, oh, I haven't done it yet. So
I think that's really good.
more
What if you
inclusive.
said a resident or a registered voter, and then that was more inclusive as opposed to being exclusive? And I think that would then bring the folks into the fold you're talking about. And then there are also reasons other folks can't register to vote as well, and they should still have a voice.
Well, and I think honestly, it should be 2 separate questions, right? Like, are you a resident or, well, maybe not. So I'll figure it out. I'll get it looking good and get it out to you guys for a final look.
I
Thank you.
think definitely you want to at least leave that question that, are you a resident? I think that's important. So I wouldn't cut that out at all. Either add a separate one like you're doing or together.
So.
Please. Sorry about that. Are we still, any more questions on this? Any more discussion? Okay, not really sure. Well, there's a letter that is from Mr. Roberts in the packet. You can read at your leisure, or if somebody would like to read it out loud for the attendees, that's fine with me. Also, totally up to you. Otherwise, why is this moving too fast? We are moving on to, I think it's going to be the status report. Is that
Kelly, I
right?
guess I have one other question just before we move on. Sorry. So I guess it's for Scott Baker and Susie Steck question. Are we still on track for a draft of the scoring matrix resolution for next Monday?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's realistic.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Thanks.
And that's just a review of it, because that's only a study session, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to check. So are we still looking, and I'm sorry, I missed the last study session, so there was no Wi-Fi where I was. But still valuing points for the redevelopment for non-utilized spaces. Is that one of the things, Scott, that you'll be considering?
I actually don't have it right in front of me, but
Okay.
it was one of the things we had talked about during the last study session, was trying to find ways to provide up for just equitable opportunities to earn points for as far as property owners go. But we also did want to put some emphasis on those redevelopment ready properties.
Okay, and for areas that are underdeveloped.
We talking about House in the Woods.
No. I would never, I know.
No, I think what we had talked about again was that there would be kind of a sliding scale depending on the level of investment in the property.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the status report on the phase 2 stormwater permits. You're on mute, hon. Excuse me.
All right. This is in regards to the illicit discharge and elimination program. That's a part of our outfall inspection with the state. The Eagle used to be DNR. And it's a 5-year program. So this year in the past year was a testing period in regards to the stormwater discharge. So they identified, there were originally 7 outfalls. One's being taken off of this list and actually placed on the catch basin list. And then there were some opportunities for some improvement in regards to some of those sites, and DPS and staff are already working on those. But I just wanted to share the actual status report with you. So it's just informational, no action is required.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions or concerns about the report? Feedback?
Yeah, there was one that they couldn't get a measurement on because of the condition that it was in. I assume they're gonna try to clean that one up so that they can get a measurement on it.
Correct. So if there's no other questions on that one, are you ready to move on to
Yep.
D? Okay.
Yep, DDA Special Projects Manager. Expanded job duties.
Yes, so as you all know, the departure of Chris led to some roles that needed to be filled, and Corey Dahl, the DDA and Special Projects Manager, was asked to take on the community and events responsibilities that Chris had undertaken. And so she happily agreed, and at the DDA executive committee met at the beginning of September to kind of discuss what her expanded role could be, as well as a corresponding salary increase. And just to give a bit of background, last fall, the executive committee they hammered out an agreement with the city for a cost share agreement. And as part of that agreement, the DDA covered 15% of the Parks and Rec coordinator salary. So that equated to approximately $8,000. With Chris's departure, that obviously left that $8,000 open and available. And so at their board meeting on September 17th, the board decided to allocate that $8,000 towards a salary increase for the DDA and Special Projects Manager position, and the city agreed to contribute an additional $4,000 for that salary increase to cover the projects that fall outside of the DDA boundaries. So roughly the city is paying $6,000 for Corey's salary, and the remaining $36,000 is coming directly out of the DDA's budget. So that'll bring her total salary to $43,000, and it's in the memo and this will be updated in the cost share agreement with the city, but the split will still remain 90% DDA funded, 10% city funded. And that is in a nutshell what it is.
Did you say that her salary be 43 or 42?
42.
Oh, okay. Thought I heard 43.
And I just want to note that this is a shifting of dollars. It's not an increase overall in either of our budgets.
Okay, so my question is, are we not going to be hiring for a Parks and Rec coordinator at all? We're not going to consider that position any longer? Or we just, yeah.
Definitely not a full-time. I don't anticipate even a part-time at the present time. We have a meeting scheduled with the city of Southfield for Wednesday to talk about enrichment programming. So we'll see how that goes. And I'll have a more robust report for you, if not this Monday, by your October 18th meeting.
So this is not an increase, but is it just, it's a flat across the board? We're not doing an increase to any salaries, but we're also not saving any money by doing this?
By my calculation, I mean, the DDA is not, there's no change in the DDA's budget. My calculations, and Cheryl and Pam can correct me if I'm wrong, this would be a savings to the city of approximately $36,000. Does that sound about right? Because I don't recall off the top of my head what Chris's exact salary was. So
It was roughly that. So his salary is just going to stay out there, not being utilized. That's what you're saying. In a nutshell, that's what you're saying.
Right, so we're basically saving Chris's
We're saving
salary
money.
less $4,000.
Yeah.
So whatever that
Yes.
number is, that's what we're saving because we're eliminating the position. So Cheryl, do you anticipate, and maybe you can't tell at this time, but let's say a year from now, Delta variant is gone, COVID is conquered, things get back to normal. Do you anticipate being able to cover all of the responsibilities that Chris was doing through splitting it up to other people? Or do you think at that point, then we might have to either go back to a full-time position or a part-time position for, to backfill Chris, so to speak?
I'm open to taking another look at it, especially a year from now, particularly if there were increased participation in some of our recreational programming. But the other elements of his job were pretty extensive also, including the oversight of the building and safety and parks in particular. So figuring out how to contract or redistribute those responsibilities is what I'm working on for now, for the short term, and then we'll look at it long term as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
I had a concern from a resident about eliminating Chris's position. So we're confident at this point that Corey will be able just to maintain as is, as it was going on like now.
Yes, she was
Yes.
already participating in most of the major programs because they were mostly located here on site in the parks and downtown. So it's not that big a transition in regards to the major programs that we were already offering, such as the tree lighting ceremony and fall fest and things of that nature.
Now, Corey's been doing a really good job for, the programs that I was involved with her with. So just want to make sure and the rest, or give reassurance to residents that the programs that were in the works or the ones that we are used to every year will still be being carried off without a hitch.
Yeah, she definitely has Chris's energy.
Yeah, it's and it's, you know, I've reassured her on any of those moments where she's like, this is a package deal, you know, I mean, they're in the DDA for the most part, and so we're working together on this. I mean, we are still doing, Fall Fest is still a go. We still have the tree lighting, breakfast with Santa, as well as the artisan market that we hosted a couple of years ago, and then we're planning to bring back anyway. So we still have quite a bit in the works for everyone.
And there's the added benefit to the city in that the cost sharing percentages is greater for Corey's position than it was for Chris's. So
Right, right.
we're leveraging that as well.
Okay.
And if you want, we can talk about the RFP for the Realtor and the regular council session, since that's going to be there as well.
Okay, well then, we have 3 minutes to go into, 2 minutes now to go into the regular meeting. So is there anything that's burning that someone has to say right now? Or that cannot wait until our regular meeting?
And public comment.
In public comment, I'm sorry, I didn't see, was anybody's hands up for public comment?
No hands raised for public comment.
Okay, well then, I would, say let's log off of here and reconvene as the city council meeting in 1 minute, 2 minutes too. Okay.
See you in a minute.
All right.